Hello, everybody. As the Middle East continues to be incredibly violent and unstable, one hope is coming from Saudi Arabia, at least according to some people. My guest today believes that Saudi Arabia has a chance, finally, to lead the Middle East through a man called Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, who is the new ruler of Saudi Arabia. My guest today, Karen Elliott House, has a new book out, The Man Who Would Be King. And Karen is joining us, not from Saudi Arabia, but the closest thing to the equivalents of Saudi Arabia in the United States, Princeton, New Jersey. Karen, that of course was a joke. I don't want to insult either people from Princeton or from Saudi Arabia by comparing the two. How do you get from Princeton, New Jersey to Saudi Arabia? You've written this remarkable autobiography. Is it an official one? I know you had tremendous access to...
No, it wasn't an official one. I just met him. I wrote a book on Saudi Arabia that came out in 2012, and I kept going back just to keep up. And in 2016, I asked to meet him and succeeded. But I didn't. I was just doing something for the Wall Street Journal.
When you say doing something, that sounds a little bit of an understatement, Karen.
Writing a piece for the Wall Street Journal, where I worked for 32 years.
And you were the publisher, so you weren't a clerk at the Journal. You were a heavy hitter there, or are a heavy hitter.
I wasn't publisher at this time. I retired in 2006, so this was 10 years later. But anyway, it didn't. The second time I saw him in 2017, Saudis were saying, "Who is this? We don't know him. He's young." And by then he had banned the religious police. And for people who didn't like that, they were, where did this guy come from? And so, but his picture was everywhere in the country, in every hotel, on every building in the Riyadh. And so I said to him, you're a cardboard cutout. Your picture is everywhere, but nobody knows anything about you. And I would like to write about you and try to make you a man in full, to understand, where did you get these ideas? What shaped the man who is reshaping Saudi Arabia? He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. So we kept meeting, and then finally in 2023, I decided I knew enough to write a book about him. So I asked them to put all of our meetings on the record, because they had all been off the record. And I say, I can't write a book about a man that I can't quote. So they took all of my notes and, did put them on the record. And then I started writing the book.
Sounds like there's a book in a book, Karen. And someone should write a book about how a feisty journalist originally from Texas, who was the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, a woman, of course, should end up pitching Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, not exactly known as a feminist, or certainly not from a place which gives women many rights, a biography, which you've done with this book. What baggage intellectually, ideologically did you bring, or do you bring, to this project, The Man Who Would Be King? As you note, you wrote a book back in 2012, 2013 on Saudi Arabia, its people's past, religion, fault lines. As a woman, there's obviously a lot to digest and think about. Is that fair? Particularly as a woman, and as a Western woman, as an enlightened, emancipated, successful female.
I think, frankly, and I always did, that being a woman was an advantage in Saudi Arabia, because in this time of strict religious dominance, a woman could see men, because Saudi men knew what the world was like. But men could not see women. So I could see both men and women. And that was a big advantage in trying to understand the country. And I think actually growing up in Matador, Texas, population 900, was another advantage. I mean, my family was very conservative. So my father allowed no shorts, no pants, no TV, no telephone, no dating. So he would have been a good Saudi father. So it didn't scare me that the country was religious. Religion didn't frighten me. And I think in a town like Matador, my father was a welder. I mean, we were definitely on the lower middle class of the town, but everyone was really. The mayor was just another man you knew. So you didn't have this awe of people who had titles, whether it's a king or a crown prince or a minister, or everybody to me was just people, because everybody in Matador, as Rosalind Carter used to say, knew everything I ever did. So, everybody knew everybody, and it demystified positions and titles.
I take your point on Matador. I haven't been there, but your father didn't force you to wear a veil, and there weren't fundamentally different rules for women and men in the way that traditional rules exist in Saudi Arabia. Is that a difference? I mean, my point is, growing up as a woman in Texas enabled you to go to university, become an enormously successful author, journalist, publisher of the leading newspaper in America. So it's quite different. There are maybe there are the beginnings of a Karen Elliott house in Saudi today, but there's no Karen Elliott houses historically in Saudi Arabia, are there?
No, but there were women who had ambition under the woman who is now the head of the Saudi Stock Exchange. She graduated from university and went to work as a financial analyst. And in those days, 15 years ago, 20 years ago it was, men that she called at companies would not speak to her. So she had to write her questions and have her male colleagues ask them. So yes, it was far more complicated, but now she's prepared, fully prepared to do what she's doing. She's not an affirmative action woman. And there are, I would say, two handfuls of women like that. There were, King Fahd had a female doctor who told me that her family was so humiliated when they saw her on television in an operating setting, that they were just horrified and embarrassed that their daughter, they knew did eye surgery, but the fact that she let other people know she did it was humiliating for them. That was the mindset there, that if you did something as a woman, you needed to be very private about it, because it was not sanctioned in public.
Enough on the women issue for the moment, at least, Karen. Let's you've as I said, you had a book out on Saudi Arabia in 2012. It's People, Past, Religion, Fault Lines. You got this new book out about MBS. Give us a brief history lesson. Some of us will have seen Lawrence of Arabia, which is a good, maybe romantic introduction to the region and the political history. What is the overview of the history of Saudi Arabia? Did Maclean get it right in Lawrence of Arabia?
That's a bit romanticized, I would say.
In what sense?
Well, there were everyone in Arabia, even the Al Saud rulers, were poor during most of the last centuries. The Al Saud family has been ruling for nearly 300 years, off and on. But it was just a collection of Bedouin tribes, with people raiding each other, women expected to produce children, but also to help out, before the religious crackdown of the last 40 years. So it was not, as I write in the book, it was a place of solitude for much of its past. That's where the Apostle Paul went after his conversion on the road to Damascus, to just reflect on what have I seen and what am I going to do. The prophet Elijah went there. I mean, it was just a barren dirt place where people looked for water to water their cattle and themselves and eked out a living. And oil changed all that in 1938. And the country began to develop in its own way. Not modernize, but have more modern things, build cars and air conditioning, and some of the advantages of modernity. And then the religious clerics, after the Shah of Iran fell, a group of religious fanatics conquered the Mecca Mosque, and that scared the royal family to death. And they wanted to, in essence, give the religious whatever they wanted, just leave us in power. And that's what happened from 1979 until 2015, when King Salman became king and his son began to rule with him and for him.
I want to get to that in a second. You've given a good overview of the period after the discovery of oil. But what about the colonial narrative? Of course, Saudi was part of the Ottoman Empire. And my understanding of the narrative, and I'm sure it's wrong because most of the things I know are wrong, is that there were two dominant families. Was it the Husseinis and the Sauds? And the Husseinis were perhaps a little more enlightened, and after the Ottomans left, there were some promises made by the English and French, which of course weren't kept up. Is there any truth to any of that? I mean, with these dominant families, it wasn't just the Sauds, was it? There were other powerful families on the Arabian Peninsula.
That's true, but Saudi Arabia was never colonized by the British or anyone else. I mean, the Ottomans nominally ruled it, and the Hussein family, who claim they're to be direct descendants from the Prophet Muhammad, were ruling in Mecca at the until 1924, when Ibn Saud defeated the Hussein, and who's the grandfather of King Hussein of Jordan, and his son Abdullah, who's ruling now. But because it wasn't colonized, they don't have the same, view of the British and the Americans and the French, because they mostly did have Arab rulers, not Ottoman rulers, not the British, not any colonizer.
But what about the story? And this is in Lawrence of Arabia, but it's in
Mhm.
lots of other narratives too. And I think it's kind of commonly understood is that the Arab revolt itself against the Ottomans during the First World War was which, and again, please correct me. I'm sure you will if
Mhm.
I'm wrong. That began in some ways in the Arab Peninsula. Um, that was built on Anglo-French promises of independence. I mean, I don't want to throw in the Balfour Declaration and the Israeli question, the question of Palestine-Israel too, because that only complicates things too much. But
Mhm.
was the birth of Saudi Arabia as a modern state, was it bound up in some ways in broken promises from the colonial powers, particularly the British and the French?
Well, the modern state, which was declared in 1932, um, was founded by Abdulaziz Al Saud from the long line of other Al Saud rulers. The Lawrence of Arabia started out to um, he tried to persuade the Arabs on behalf to fight on behalf of the British in World War One. So he encouraged them to let's go invade and uh, knock off the Ottomans. And he started from a town called Al Waj in Arabia, and I went there a year and a half ago. A female Saudi pilot flew me in a helicopter. We went to visit the town where Lawrence launched his battle from. And yes, the British and the French were promising uh, independence for Arabia, and at the same time working to enhance their hold over um, much of the Middle East. So the Arabs got dragged into helping with this fight, and then the French wanted to take control of Syria and Lebanon, and the territories they wanted. So the Sykes-Picot Agreement um, divided the territory between the French and the British, even as they were telling the Arabs that work with us and we'll give you your own independence and nation.
Yeah, they have a term for the British out there, the perfidious Albion, it'd be correct. The
Yeah.
subtitle of your book, Karen, is Mohammed bin Salman and the Transformation of Saudi Arabia, the man who would be king. The real transformation, of course, happened, as you note, with this discovery of oil. It's a remarkable story. Tell us briefly how oil was discovered, who initially owned it, and how much of it was there and is there in Saudi Arabia.
Well, the the initial discoverers of oil were Americans, and the Saudis um, were the Al Saud ruler, Abdulaziz, was so poor that he got the money that what money he had basically came as handouts from the British to cooperate with them. And the they found oil in Bahrain, and the Brits had found oil in Iraq. So he um, allowed the Americans to go prospecting. He wanted them to look for water because they also had no water. But the Americans found something better than water. They found oil. And that did change the country. He got, I think his original payment from the with the discovery of oil was $50,000 or $250,000, which was like manna from heaven. It was so large, and they began to build a few roads. He bought some old cars rather than going around the country on camels. He was able to drive. The British once gave him, after Franklin Roosevelt gave him an airplane and a wheelchair, when they met, Winston Churchill, not to be outdone, gave him a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, I've heard that story. It's in a movie I think I saw.
Yeah, but the steering wheel of the Rolls Royce, of course, is on the right. And he was used to riding on the right with the driver on the left, so he wouldn't ever ride in the car. It's a beautiful car. It's in a museum in Riyadh, but he wouldn't use it, and they equipped it, instead of with a bar, with a pretty silver wash bowl that he could prepare himself for prayer. But again, he didn't use it. Apparently, his son, Salman, the current king, drove it a little bit, and then it's in a museum now. You can go see it.
Yeah, I'm sure Churchill, who rather enjoyed drinking, did very different things in a Rolls Royce than the Saud monarchy. You talk about the original king as the ruler, Karen. What does that mean? Are we talking about a feudal system? You noted that he was incredibly poor. It was a huge country physically, mostly desert, small amounts of nomadic people. What exactly did ruler mean? Were they paying obedience, tax? Was it a warrior-like system?
Well, basically, he spent from the Al Sauds had lost control of the country in the late just before 1900, and he snuck back into the country and conquered Riyadh in 1902, and he spent 30 years trying to bring the tribal sheikhs, leaders, under his control. So once he essentially did that, what the social contract was, he provides and they provide their loyalty to him. So they would not fight without his permission, was the deal. So he then was supposed to feed people, take care of their problems. He, as king, he declared himself king, but as king, he was pretty much like a tribal sheikh. The sheikh has to solve the problems within the tribe and help solve them among the tribes, and he has to keep his people fed so that they don't decide to find a new tribal chief. And that's basically what he did. So he would have to provide massive amounts of food for poor people who would show up at his mud palace, which is still in Riyadh. So it was there was no money, and this is why he needed the handouts from the British to retain, to provide service, to get loyalty in return.
So what kind of system, Karen, as I said, you've written this book on Saudi Arabia as a sort of primer before we get to MBS. As Saudi Arabia became this incredibly rich oil state, particularly in the 70s after the price hikes and everything else that happened, what kind of socioeconomic and political system evolved? Was it a kind of autocratic welfare state? That's my understanding of the evolution of the Saudi system.
Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. It was fundamentally a welfare state. It was under Abdulaziz too, but the welfare was at a very low level. once they discovered oil. And then, as you say, after the oil embargo of 73, when the price quadrupled in a matter of weeks, the country had real money to try to develop itself, to have decent airports, highways. I mean, the first time I landed in Riyadh in 1978, you know, the airport was a tiny little thing, and now they have a massive, big airports all over the country. But so there was a lot of development like that. But people became completely dependent on government jobs, and the government didn't really care whether you did anything or not, because in offices I would visit in the late 70s and early 80s, there was always an Egyptian or a Palestinian or Indian that was doing the work, that was keeping track of things. And mostly they weren't interested in people doing anything. They still, you know, the guy in the office would put a straight pen through the papers and lay them aside. I mean, it was as I'd call it, a somnolent society. It was just people had a job. The military was a welfare system. Mostly, they didn't expect you to train or really be able to fight. It was just a way of procuring tribal loyalty and giving people money. And the same with employment, so that everybody became dependent on the government. But over time, as I wrote in that first book, it was like when you were born, it was like, moving into a 4-star hotel. You got your free birth, free food, free education, but it began to deteriorate. You know, it was more a Motel 6, as I called it, by the time of 2005 and 6 and 7, when I was writing that book. And people were fed up with the hypocrisy. Young people, some of them wanted to work and accomplish something, but even if they didn't, they wanted some freedom and some entertainment. And they looked at the hypocrisy of the royal family that was making them obey all kinds of religious strictures, pray 5 times a day, don't look at a woman, don't mix with anybody you're not related to, don't drink, don't do this and that, while the royals were doing pretty much whatever they wanted. So I think that there was great disgruntlement at the time of when that book came out in 2012.
And this creates, of course, the context for MBS. Meanwhile, as Saudi sank into this sort of increasingly, I don't know whether it be a corrupt welfare state or
corrupt
one that lacked any kind of development or direction, the Middle East was dramatically developing. You had the rise of Ba'athite regimes in Iraq and Syria, Nasser in Egypt, eventually the Shia revolution in Iran. How did the politics of the region impact on Saudi? As Saudi sank increasingly into this slumber, the rest of the region was dramatically changing, for better or worse. Some of it was for better, much of it for worse.
Yeah, well, a lot of Saudis were affected by the Afghan war. They went there to fight the Russians after the Russian invasion in 78, and they became, it was good breeding ground for training terrorists. And a lot of them came back to Saudi Arabia determined to change their own country, which, hadn't hadn't progressed much or been very active in the region. The Saudi policy was always, foreign policy was to get along with the Americans and try to keep things calm with everybody in the region, but not to buy and bribe.
Yeah, and of course, one of the people who came back from Afghanistan was a certain Osama bin Laden from a very prominent Saudi family. So that sort of explains much of the political turbulence and the complexity. So let's get to the subject. We've created a good foundation, Karen. I appreciate your patience with me. Let's get to the book, The Man Who Would Be King. By the way, the good news for you is it's #1 on Amazon's military leaders biography. Would it be fair to call MBS a military leader, or is that more of a metaphor?
No, I mean, he is not a military leader. He is a reformer, but he's not. Napoleon was a reforming military leader. MBS is more, the Crown Prince is more, like Peter the Great.
Yeah, I've always thought of MBS in those terms, in terms of 18th century European history. Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, Marie Theresa in Austria. Would it be fair to call him an enlightened despot? Is that one description?
Yeah, I think that's fair. He is an autocrat. I'm not sure, if you ask me what's the difference between a despot and an autocrat, that I can give you a good answer, because to me it's very very much the same. People who expect to call the shots. But yes, he is an enlightened despot. He grew up in that period when you couldn't do anything, and that's why, he takes, as I say in the book, all this trying to put the religious police aside is personal, not just policy for him, because he was growing up like all of the cohort his age, and 60% of the population of Saudi Arabia is under 30. So, he knew that generation, and he knew, I think, that they were unhappy like him. So instead of talking about making change the way King Abdullah had, his father's predecessor, when his father took over, MBS simply confronted the religious police and said, you cannot go on the street arresting people anymore. That if you see somebody do something wrong, you can tell the real police, the Saudi police, but you can't go up to a woman and tell her that she can't have red fingernails or whatever, because there had been a lot of incidents. Women became both emboldened and outraged even before he did that, and would have these confrontations with the religious police. So he liberated them and the whole society by putting the religious police in their place. They're still being paid. That's the Saudi way, but they can't perform the way they used to.
You used to be the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, so you have a great deal of sensitivity as a journalist, and for other journalists. Of course, some people argue that MBS already has blood on his hands, the blood of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was assassinated and chopped up in Turkey. Is there any truth to that? It's all very well him calling off the religious police on women drivers, but what about the Khashoggi incident, which we don't hear as much about anymore, but we did for a long time?
Yeah. Well, loyalty, as I have discussed earlier, loyalty is a very big factor between a ruler and his people. And the last time I saw Khashoggi, he had been told that he could not write anymore because the government considered that he was on the payroll of Qatar. And if you recall, they broke relations with Qatar in 2017. And that's about the time he moved to Washington. And so they believed that he was, quote, disloyal. I believe that.
And he, of course, wrote for the Washington Post.
Yeah, when I saw him, he had a good sense of humor. I had known him for 10 years. He said that everybody talked about the crown. Well, he wasn't crown prince then yet, but Mohammed bin Salman gave all the ministers key performance indicators, KPIs that he tracked on an iPad. Are they doing this, that, and the other that they're supposed to do? And he said, I prefer democracy, but at least we have KPIs. And not too long after that, he departed and went to work in Washington for the Washington Post. But in that meeting, he didn't criticize. He said, "I support the Crown Prince war in Yemen. I support the reforms." So he seemed to be expressing some mystification as to why he was not trusted to write anymore.
But Karen, I mean, when it comes to MBS and Khashoggi, it's one thing not to publish, one thing not to allow them to live in the country. It's one thing to perhaps even imprison them, but it's quite another to chop them up. I mean, to what extent was MBS involved in this? Is this something that perhaps embarrassed him? It was an excessive response on the part of the secret police, or in your view, I mean, you've written this biography of the guy. Did he give the final nod to murder Khashoggi?
I obviously cannot say that I have any inside information, but
what's
I
your
do,
sense, though?
I do believe that he is too smart to order somebody to do that. I think what he ordered, that it was a rendition gone wrong. He said, bring the guy back, because once you get somebody back in Saudi Arabia, the press is under control. And even if the Westerners find out that somebody lost their life, for instance, if they had taken him back to Saudi Arabia and killed him, but more likely just imprisoned him, because not near that same time, they took a prince. I mean, this happens with regularity, that the royals pick up members of the family who are not behaving the way they want them to and bring them back. And the man who was in charge of that rendition was a man named Saud Qahtani, of this prince. And Saud Qahtani was the press guy for the royal court, and was also appointed himself to keep anybody, to torment and deal with anybody that tried to cause problems for Mohammed bin Salman. So I find it, I don't think it would have happened if, if the crown prince had said, bring me that guy, but, be sure he gets here alive.
Rather, maybe the guy misunderstood me. He said, bring the guy back. He misunderstood, bring him back in lots of little pieces.
Well, I mean, you don't know whether when they picked him up at the embassy and put the bag over his head, whether they smothered him accidentally, intentionally, whether they injected him with something to calm him down that killed him, or, I mean, all kinds of things. It's, lots of things can go wrong.
Yeah, well, leaving
Whether
aside
that's
that issue, we've done some shows on the appalling record of Saudi human rights. Now,
yeah,
again, this is not my expertise, and I'm not claiming that prisons and the secret police were the invention of MBS. But would it be fair to say that Saudi civil rights and the terrible human rights record, the imprisonment of people, the torture of people, the death sentences, that these have actually increased under the MBS regime?
yes, absolutely. But the only countries probably that are worse, I think I have in the book, I list them, but basically Iran, China, North Korea, countries like that
Probably
are
the United States as well.
are even worse. No, we don't treat people anything like that badly.
So what's the best? So we know MBS he's no Michael Dukakis. He's not some
Right.
soft-hearted liberal. He's, as you suggested, or as we talked, he's an enlightened despot. He does want to change the country dramatically.
Mhm.
What's the best case? I always thought that his building of NEOM and the billions of dollars he was investing in this new city reflected some sort of profoundly innovative instinct. But even that now seems to be in crisis. To make the argument for MBS, what do we have to say?
That he's trying. It isn't easy to develop a country, and he's done it more rapidly than anybody that I can think of in recent memory. But some of these projects, as you say, it's a kind word when you call it innovative or innovative. Um, um, but some of his ideas are like the line in Neom, that city of that's supposed to house 9 million and be 100 miles long and as tall as the Empire State Building for that whole 100 miles. I mean, that's some might say a monstrosity, but so it's not surprising that it's run into a lot of construction problems and is now down to there will be 1.5 miles of it by 2030.
Sounds like high-speed trains in California.
Yes,
Probably
exactly.
actually makes high-speed trains in California look good. Maybe the MBS should read Ezra Klein's Abundant.
Yeah.
Okay, so he hasn't done. So you say he's trying. I mean, some people in the region have tried more successfully. You've got the example of Dubai, the Emirates. You mentioned Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. I mean, none of them are places you necessarily want to live, certainly when it comes to democracy or toleration. But aren't they much more successful models? Is he emulating Dubai when he looks at the world, when he looks at his globe? Is he trying to be like Singapore, Dubai, the Emirates?
I think the model Saudi site is Malaysia or Singapore. But I think he's trying to outdo Dubai and the UAE and Qatar. They have tiny populations, 175,000 real native citizens, and everyone else in the country is foreign and there to work and get rich. So it's a lot easier to develop a society where you're really just hiring foreign experts to do what you tell them to do. He has to do this in a manner that creates jobs for young Saudis, because what he's saying is, we can't afford to hire you all anymore. The public welfare system that was Saudi Arabia for 60 years is going to have to change. So I need new industries. So he's trying to create tourism and AI and cutting edge in Neom to have a new Silicon Valley up there in the north of.
Everyone tries to build a new Silicon
Yeah,
Valley,
yeah,
don't they, Karen? I mean, no one succeeded.
yeah. And so far, nobody's succeeded.
And
But
so it's hard enough anywhere, hard enough in New York, let alone Neom, which, as you say, only has, I don't know, a few hundred yards of viability. What about on the political side? You wrote an interesting piece as I began about Saudi's chance to lead the Middle East. Clearly, Donald Trump feels at home in the Gulf, particularly in Saudi Arabia. Maybe they are comfortable with him too. He successfully started the peace talks, the Abraham Accords, in his last presidency. Can Saudi Arabia and MBS, is their ultimate legacy perhaps less domestic, less Neom, and more in doing a deal with Israel and finally beginning to address the problem of Palestine?
if he succeeds at doing that, that would be a huge accomplishment. I know that he wants to recognize Israel. He wants Israel to help create that, turn that Neom area into a technology center with Israeli technology, Saudi money, jobs for Saudis. But, the Israelis, I cannot see them accepting a Palestinian state. Right now, there's an effort to destroy Hamas and to, encourage the Palestinians to leave Gaza, and the West Bank is no more peaceful. Really, they're just not involved in a war. So I'm very dubious. I think if he and his society does not want right now, the Saudi population, according to a poll, 6% of people object to recognizing Israel because of what they've watched in Gaza. They never cared much. Saudis his age, they didn't see the Israeli war of 67 or 73 or, so Israel was just a big, powerful country and not one that scared them because the Israelis weren't trying to conquer Saudi Arabia. But, now that they've seen the killing, they are anti. He's enough in control, I think, that if he wants to do it, even without a Palestinian state or with a tenuous promise by the Israelis that we will get to something, he can do it. So it's, I think, one of the biggest decisions he will face. Some people tell me it won't happen in Donald Trump's presidency. Other people think that it will happen because, as one Saudi said to me, we can't, the Crown Prince's policy is Saudi first. What's good for my people and me? And that we can't hold up what's good for the country to look after the Palestinians forever, that they're going to have to deal with their own issues, and we're going to move on with Saudi first.
Finally, Karen, you've been very generous with your time. I know you've got to run. It sounds to me like there's almost a Sisyphean quality. You don't sound particularly optimistic. On the international front, he has to deal with all the forces that have resulted in the failure of the Arab-Israeli, any potential peace now for almost a century. Internally, he's struggling. Neom is a failure. What are the chances of MBS actually turning out to be the Peter the Great, or the Frederick the Great, or the architect of a new Singapore? What are the chances, on the other hand, in 50 years of him being entirely forgotten, just turning into sand like so much else in the desert?
Yes, I quote in the book, the poet Shelley's poem Ozymandias about dirt in the "Look at me, you mighty in despair," that it could all turn to dirt. I think because he is truly driven, he is intelligent, and he's learning. I think he's learning you can't annoy everybody all the time, and being, a bit more judicious. I think to get what he wants, he's going to have to be more upfront, more put his cards on the table and make hard choices. And if he has the courage to do that and survives doing it, I think there is a lot of concern that you never know who's out. Sadat died for peace. Rabin died trying to make peace. That it's a dangerous business that he's in. The one thing I probably admire most about him is that he seems to just be determined to keep on keeping on. I mean, if it were me and I had all these issues that he faces now, I'd probably crawl under the bed and take a sleeping pill. I mean, it's really a tough life. And I guess if you enjoy it, Peter the Great enjoyed it. Lee Kuan Yew enjoyed it. I mean, I knew Lee Kuan Yew well. He was always out there also pugnaciously fighting for Singapore. And he wound up with a country that's the best educated and among the best educated and among the highest per capita incomes. But his people were much more motivated toward work. But I think the Saudis are becoming more motivated.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the difference between Lee Kuan Yew and MBS is that Lee Kuan Yew built Singapore, which was basically a rock in the South China Sea without any massive poverty. It's much harder to reinvent. Well, there you have it. If MBS, if you're watching, Karen Elliott House, your biographer, suggests you have a small chance, but not much of a chance. Maybe, Karen, he should go into exile in Matador, Texas. Would he be welcome there?
He probably would be, but that's as foreign. That's far different from even the desert of Saudi Arabia.
Similar weather, though. Both rather hot, I'm guessing.
They're hot. Matador is hot like Riyadh, just hot. Princeton, New Jersey is hot and humid like Jeddah. So I prefer Matador and Riyadh, hot, dry heat instead of any humidity.
Well, there you have it. Karen Elliott House, the author of The Man Who Would Be King. I appreciate you, Karen, dealing with my obnoxious questions.
No, thank you.
Fascinating man, fascinating moment in history. We shall see.